Good morning. I want to thank you for joining us here at the Greenbrier Church Online as we continue our look at the book of First Peter. I had a friend tell me a story about this new manager in their office who was really enjoying their authority and power that came with this mid-management level position. The gentleman was very fond of calling meetings, looking for opportunities to let other people know that he was the boss. The only problem was no one else in the office seemed to acknowledge his authority. So, in an effort to let people know that he was in charge, he went out to a sign shop and had a sign made that he hung outside of his office. It simply said, "I'm the boss. I'm the one in charge. You will respect my authority." My friend confessed that when the boss went out to lunch, he took a large Post-it note and placed it over that new sign, and the Post-it note simply said, "Your wife called. She wants her sign back." It seems that we've always had this issue with authority. If you were to go all the way back to Genesis chapter 3, you'll find that one of the reasons that Adam and Eve committed the first sin was because they were rebelling against authority. So it makes perfect sense that Peter would spend some time talking about the issue of Christians living under grace and authority. You see, if we give away authority, then, well, everything else goes away as well. Over the next few weeks, I want us to take some time to look at what Peter says about civil authority, authority in the workplace, and authority in the home. Peter understands our struggle with authority, so he's going to step away from that A-B pattern that he's been employing, and he's going to take some time to flesh out what we talked about last week. If you watched last week's sermon, I hope you remember Peter gives us 3 directives on how we're supposed to live our lives in the midst of struggling in this world. He said, number 1, you need to live like an alien. Don't live like this is all that there is, believing this is your destination. Don't get comfortable here because, well, you're on a journey. You're headed home. You've not made it home yet. Peter wants us to trade this destination mentality for a preparation mentality. Everything that's happening now is a preparation for what's going to come in eternity. The world is supposed to be uncomfortable and difficult. That's why we long to go home. The second directive was that we were supposed to fight like a soldier. You see, there's a war that's still being fought in the turf of our heart. It's a war fought for the control of our hearts and our souls. Peter says it's a war of passion. Desire rules our heart, and all too often we desire something that was created, and we want to use that creation to try to find our identity, our meaning, our purpose. Instead, Peter reminds us we were created to desire God and to desire to live in a way that pleases Him. We need to look for our identity, our meaning, and our purpose in our relationship with God. But as long as sin still lives inside of us, as long as we're still living in this broken world, there's going to be a war raging in our heart, so Peter reminds us to fight like a soldier. The third directive was to behave like a representative, to know that everyone who's God's child has been called to be an ambassador. Wherever you are, whatever you're doing, in every situation, you're called to represent God. Your life is an appeal for the gospel, an example of what living in God's grace and mercy is all about. Your life doesn't belong to you anymore. At your baptism, you gave your life back to God and to the bigger work of His kingdom. And so we're to live like an alien, fight like a soldier, behave like a representative. And Peter says the first way that we do this is to submit yourselves for the Lord's sake to every authority instituted among men. If we want to live lives that represent God, we need to mature to the place where we are able to willingly submit to human authority that God's placed in our lives. This is a call for you and I to look at authority as a good thing. But honestly, that's not the way we tend to look at authority. That's not the way we tend to think about authority. In our culture, authority is more of a hassle or even a curse. So Peter's being honest with us here, and probably a whole lot more honest than we're comfortable being with ourselves, because the truth is, as long as I'm a broken person trying to deal with sin that still lives in me, I'm going to need help. Basically, I need to be protected from myself. I'm in desperate are desperate need of laws that protect me from me. And I need people who will enforce those laws. Every time in my life that I made a mess of things, every time in your life that you made a mess of things, those were times we were trying to live under our own authority. We were living under this delusion that we were wise enough to make the best decisions, to decide what's right and what's fair. And the truth is, as long as sin runs rampant in our lives, we need someone with more wisdom to help us set our boundaries. Peter's calling us to a difficult truth that if we can acknowledge that we struggle with sin, then we need to also acknowledge the blessing of authority. In Peter's mind, there's not any separation between human authority and the authority of God. In his understanding, when we submit to human authority, we're also submitting to the authority of God. You can't say, I love God's authority and I hate human authority. It just doesn't work that way. But it's not just Peter. As a matter of fact, the New Testament is filled with letters by biblical writers that have the same understanding. For example, Paul says in Romans 13:1, let every person be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except from God, and those that exist have been instituted by God. Maybe this is because one of the charges that were made against Jesus is that he was disloyal to Rome. If you remember at his trial, one of the false charges they made was that Jesus was not only opposed to paying taxes, that he also claimed to be a king. While the truth is, Jesus constantly taught his followers to show respect for Caesar, to pay their taxes. I find it interesting that people also made the same accusations of civil defiance against Paul. It seems that this charge was often made against Christians. Maybe that's why in the New Testament there's so much ink and space about loyalty to civil governments. You can't separate the sovereign authority of God from the existence of human authority. That's not in agreement with the biblical worldview. Human authority is actually the physical representation of the authority of God. You can't separate them. And so in every aspect of your life, whether it's government or family or church or the workplace, God has established authority. Essentially, when you rebel against human authority, you're rebelling against God. Now, I want to go ahead and address a question that I'm pretty sure some of you have right at this point in the sermon, and that's, what do we do with unjust authority? And it's a really valid question that Peter deals with. If you jump ahead a couple verses to verse 18 of chapter 2, you see that Peter says, servants, be subject to your master with all respect, and not only to the good and gentle, but also to the unjust. God even exercises his authority through flawed and at times unjust human authority. It's not my right to say because that authority is imperfect that I don't have to obey it. If you do that, then everything comes crashing down. You see, on this side of eternity, human authority is never going to be perfect. Every authority is flawed in some way, shape, or form. Peter's concern is that in our quest for self-rule, we'll always find a reason when we can say, I don't have to obey that law. I mean, we like to point to biblical examples like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, but they were commanded to commit adultery, and out of greater allegiance to God, they resisted human authority. The truth is, those types of instances are extremely rare in our culture. I know you don't like that other political party. I know you don't like the rules that were passed and enacted by that politician you didn't vote for. But there's not been a single time in your life that the government ever required you to deny God. Now, they might have made decisions or allowed things that you believe aren't godly decisions. But just because they allow something, it's not the same thing as requiring something. That's why Peter says, even when it's flawed authority, even when it's unjust, you are called to honor, respect, and submit. If you think back, you might discover the same thing I've discovered. Some of my greatest problems have come when I fought against authority. When authority lines up with what I like, what I want, well, then it's really easy to follow authority. But when it goes against what I desire, then do I really love authority? I mean, are you thankful for an employer that tells you what to do? Are you thankful for the civil laws around you? Do you love the speed limit because you recognize it protects you from you? Over the past 20 years, I can't recall a single time when one of the boys came to me and said, Dad, one of the things I love most about you is your authority over my life. And I've come to realize that if you would just give me more rules, that would be so helpful, because I realize what I really need in my life is more law, because I'm a danger to me. In full disclosure, I can't ever remember a single time that I had that conversation with my parents either. Yet I can remember several times when the boys or I went to my parents and had arguments over authority. It's amazing how even the smallest things are often a cause for debate. I mean, I love it when I'm reminded, Dad, that's not what you said. What you actually said was, and then they fill in the blanks. Here's a universal truth. Whenever a child begins to debate vocabulary, they're not doing that because they love authority. They're looking for an escape, a loophole, some kind of logical way out. And that's why there's this all-inclusive nature to what Peter's saying here. You must submit to every human government, every authority. Everywhere God has established government, you are expected to be God's representative in the way that you submit to that authority. Whether to the king as the supreme authority or to governors who are sent by him to punish those who do wrong and to commend those who do right. Peter means all authority, from the king, the highest ruler, all the way down to the governor or your local authority. We're being called to live into submission. I've given a lot of time to people who've made messes of their lives, and it's not lost on me that the root problem we're often dealing with is rebellion to authority. We get into trouble when we think we know better, when we think I'm going to write my own rules and I'm going to do what I think is right for me. When what we should be doing is looking at authority as a blessing from God. Our God who knows us, who knows how much we need our thoughts, our desires, and our actions to be restrained. I know we want to try to muddy the water here to find some wiggle room, but Peter's pretty clear in that God established government to punish evil and to reward good. As long as sin exists, as long as we struggle with this desire for self-rule, then there's going to be a great need in our lives for a government that has the right and the ability to punish what's evil and reward what's good. Okay, let's try to take a step back from the big picture and look at a smaller picture, because it's all too easy to rage against the machine. Let's try to get a little closer to home. If you're a parent, then you know God's called you to be the authority in your child's life. You understand it's your job to set clear and defined boundaries that will allow your child to grow up and to be a good human. If you have that authority, you know that it also comes with responsibility. As a parent, you have a responsibility to represent God and His authority in the lives of your children. I've told you before that my relationship with God closely mirrors my relationship with my own dad. You see, when I was little, I respected my dad's authority because I was afraid of him. If I pushed against or went past his clearly defined boundaries, I was punished, and punishment's never fun. So I obeyed my dad out of fear. As I got a little older, I began to respect his authority based on reward. I learned if I did what was expected of me, then I could get money to put gas in the car, or they would let me go out and hang out with my friends on the weekends. All I had to do was respect his authority, and I could experience freedom. Eventually, I matured enough to respect his authority based on my love for him. I don't fear my dad anymore, and I don't need his permission or money to do what I want to do. I've matured to the place where I realize how much my dad loves me. And out of my respect for him and my love for him, I respect his authority. That's what's supposed to happen. You don't trust a 13-year-old to make their own decisions. They don't have the maturity or the intellectual ability to make good decisions. They need to be taught boundaries, how to respect authority. And as you continue the work, yes, the work of raising your child, hopefully you'll begin to see a change in their heart. Hopefully they will mature to the point where they find evil distasteful and goodness beautiful. It's a wonderful thing because that's how God wants us to live. Go back to the text in verse 15. We read, "For it is God's will that by doing good you should silence the ignorant talk of foolish men. Live as free men, but do not use your freedom as a cover-up for evil. Live as servants of God." Peter's going back to this idea that the way that you respond to the authorities in your life is actually kingdom work. You're living as a representative, then you're living with this understanding that the world is watching you. You know the world is making their opinions of God based on what they see in your life. And they're especially interested in seeing how we deal with the ignorance of foolish people. I don't know what comes to mind when you hear Peter talk about foolish people. My mind drifts back to Psalm 14, where the psalmist writes, "The fool has said in his heart, there is no God." You see, the ultimate foolishness is wrapped up in this belief that there's no authority greater than my own authority. Ultimate foolishness is the assertion that there's no need for me to submit to anything because I'm my own God. I'm the top of the food chain. I have the right to do whatever I want. And that's not what people say. That's how they're actually living their lives. Instead, God wants us to live as people who are free, not this fake freedom where we use our freedom as a cover-up for the evil that we want to do. Instead, real freedom is found in living as a servant of God. It might be a bit difficult for us to understand, but Peter knows firsthand that a life of submission is in fact a life of freedom. Real freedom that we've been given through Christ is freedom from the weight of the law, freedom from the bondage of sin, freedom from slavery to the world. Real freedom is not freedom from authority. That's a weird type of anarchy. I mean, when Adam and Eve stepped outside of God's authority, they didn't find freedom. They found pain and brokenness. They were driven out of the garden. They were forced to deal with weeds and scorching heat and pain and loss. Eventually, their two boys get involved in the first homicide. That's a far cry from freedom. A few chapters later, we see the free world being filled with chaos and brokenness to the point that it caused God to be sorry that He created mankind. So He sends this flood to wipe the world clean. Does that sound like freedom to you? The truth is that human independence never results in freedom. It's merely a dream or a delusion. Peter says real freedom is found in being a servant of God. When you say, "Not my will, but yours be done," you're living exactly like you were meant and created to live. Peter says real freedom is found when you honor everyone. You treat everyone with respect. Fear God. Live every day in awe of His presence and His authority. Honor the king. Be thankful for the government. As we make our way to the table, I think there are some very specific things we need to do. I think we all need to take some time to confess that we've not arrived just yet. I don't always love authority. There are places where I want my own way. You want to be the supreme leader in your own life. There are occasions where you don't love God or His law. You don't love the way God's authority is exercised in human authority. And so as we make our way to the tables, we need to take some time to confess once again that we're in desperate need of our Father's help. Our hearts want to rebel, so as we take the bread and as we share the cup, we're reminded that we can experience this celebration only because our Savior, Jesus, lived a life of submission to His Father's authority. But not only did Jesus submit to the Father's authority, He submitted Himself to human authority, even to human injustice. He allowed Himself to be falsely condemned, tortured, executed, so that we would have the opportunity to go to our Father. That submission of heart, we have to start thinking about it as we make our way to the tables, as we take the bread and the cup. We have to go to Jesus and say, "I need your forgiveness. I need your grace. I need my heart to be transformed. And I need to admit that there are times when I get it right. But there are a whole lot more times that I get it awfully wrong. I need to be submissive to you. So as we take these emblems, we have to ask God to once again deliver me from me. Life is only found when you abandon your own lordship and you place your life in the hands of God. Because submission is being able to go to God and say, God, I fully understand that my wisdom doesn't come close to your wisdom. My knowledge doesn't come close to your knowledge. Your love, your wisdom, your concern, your compassion, your care for me is all that I need while I am an alien and I sojourn here. So, Father, help me fight like a soldier to draw close to you. And Lord, let me be your representative in this community so that people will know what it is to love you and to be loved by you. I hope you have a wonderful time of conversation, prayer, and even confession around the table this morning. Please always remember that you are deeply loved. I hope you have a wonderful week, and I look forward to seeing you very soon.